I run a large haunted attraction similar to a haunted house. You pay, walk through, and we scare the lights out of you. We hold casting calls about 3 weeks before the haunt season starts, and we always have interesting people showing up. Obviously, only interesting people audition to scare others for 5 hours a night. During this time, I make a close connection with some of the actors throughout the season. All haunters will tell you that this experience bonds people in a weird, freaky way. One kid stood out to me during last year's audition. He was so creepy, and he impressed me so much that I asked him if he wanted to pick the scene he would work. We never actually do this, and simply put actors in the scenes we want them in. His choice was the butcher shop. His performance was perfect, and he managed to scare the daylights out of the test group we sent through. I was so impressed that after auditions I shook his hand and told him just how impressed I was, and he seemed excited. We talked for about 3 hours after auditions, and I will never forget what he told me as he left the makeup room. "I'm just glad I found a possible job that lets me act as I want to every day, minus the murder charges." We both got a good laugh out of this, and I told him I would call him soon to let him know if he got the job, and that we would go over details about the job. Exactly 4 days later, I took his application out of the stack, and I was very excited to call him. An old man answered the phone and went quiet when I asked if the boy was home. After his pause, the man asked what I wanted with the boy. After I explained, he told me that the boy was no longer available. I was very disappointed because I knew that this kid would have been great. Fast forward to December, I was browsing the web randomly, and when signing into Yahoo, I saw a story on the front page that said, "Chilling 911 call finally released." And there, in the article, was a picture that looked very much like the boy that auditioned. After reading the article, I learned that it was the boy, and he had been arrested for shooting his mother and sister in the head in their home. I honestly felt something I have never felt before, and I can't even explain it. As I clicked the link to the 911 call, I expected a frantic neighbor or family member, but no. It was a call made by him, and he was very calm. For 24 minutes, he talked to the operator, telling her everything emotionless. He would say things like, "I guess I've been wanting to kill," and "I am pretty, evil," whatever. I cannot even describe the feeling I got from hearing the 911 call. All I can say is that you would have to hear it yourself. I often think about this more than I should, and so many questions still float around in my head. What if he had worked with me? Would he still have done it? Would he have done it at the attraction instead? This happened to my mother about 10 years ago in the Midwest. My mom is very beautiful and a genuinely sweet person, so she tends to attract weirdos sometimes. But we never could wrap our heads around this situation. My mom had been shopping at our local Walmart for about an hour, and after paying, she activated a security alarm at the door. It turns out she had bought something that hadn't been deactivated at the register, so no harm done, and she heads out to the parking lot. As my mom is loading her groceries into her car, a Walmart employee walks up to her. He proceeds to tell her that they have a security issue regarding her and she needs to come back inside immediately. My mom assumed that it had something to do with the alarm going off and follows the man back inside. She was taken to their security office and was asked if she was shopping alone, which she was. It was then that they showed her the surveillance footage. From the moment my mom walked in, a man with a small video camera followed her and filmed her. From the parking lot footage, you can see the man follow her outside, get in a car, and continue to film her. When the Walmart employee walked up to her, he drove off. The police were called and they were able to run the plates off the man's car. It was from a rental company in a town about 2 hours away. I'm not sure why they weren't able to find the guy. Surely the rental company keeps records of their customers. But my mom was pretty rattled for a while after. This is by far the scariest experience I've had in my life, and it wasn't even me being stalked. It was my ex-girlfriend 4 years ago. We were both 18 and just started a community college nearby. Our schedules were pretty similar since we intentionally put 2 of our 5 classes with each other and took lunch off at the same time so we could eat with a group of our mutual friends. A month and a half into school, my girlfriend starts to tell me that she's noticed a guy who's following her around campus, and she describes him as someone who looks like he works there. I asked her to recount some particular instances, and the only one she told me was that he had waited outside the library for her to finish her schoolwork for the past week. And on her way to her car, she had always seen him sitting on the same bench, facing the direction she parked in. I was admittedly a bit concerned, but it was college. Everybody had a routine. Maybe his routine was to wait for someone outside the library and then go sit on a bench? I tell her that I'll go to the library during her study hour with her, and that I would do some of my work, and if the guy had ill intentions, he would back off once he saw me with her. It's important to note that I don't appear to be physically intimidating at all. I'm very slender and don't look muscular. I figured I probably wasn't going to scare somebody away, but it was worth a shot, and it comforted her at the time. We went to study, and we were sitting in front of the glass windows that separate the library from the hallway. Suddenly, she nudges my notebook and whispers while still looking down at her work, "He's watching us. Look, by the staircase doors." I look over, and I see a guy who's at most 35 years old. I figure there's no way he worked there. He looked too young. I couldn't tell if he was in his late 20s or his early 30s, not somebody you would expect to be stalking someone or anything. He had a messenger bag with him, so I figured he could have been a student. Thinking quickly and wanting to see if this guy was really stalking my girlfriend, I told her to get up and pretend to leave. I told her to leave the library and go downstairs towards the cafe. She listens, and when she is about 30 seconds down the hall, the guy starts following her. I immediately know that something's up with this guy and that he's stalking my girlfriend. I rush out of the library and he's only a few meters down the hallway, so I, as casually as possible, spark conversation with this guy, pretending like I recognized him from somewhere. I asked him if I could walk with him and he said sure. He and I walked downstairs and my girlfriend was almost never out of sight. He followed probably 15 meters behind her the whole way down to the cafeteria. He sits down at a table and I pretend like I have to keep walking and just say formalities. Goodbye, nice meeting you, and such. As soon as I am outside the door, I call my girlfriend and tell her to come out here with me because he was following her. She was somewhat suspicious of me because I was acting weird. I told her once she got outside to come around the corner of the building so that he couldn't see where she walked to from inside and would attempt to come around here looking for her. Lo and behold, he comes out about a minute after her and turns into us. I'm standing there with her and he's looking at the two of us, and all I say is why the fuck he's following my girlfriend. He played it off as a coincidence but then ramped up his harassment. That night, he texted her, saying something like, "Why the fuck was your boyfriend so mouthy with me today?" She didn't know who he was until she texted him, "Wrong number." And he replied with, "No, it's not. On campus." Although he stopped waiting outside the library, he began putting letters and gifts in her mailbox, and he even slashed my tires. By this time, I hadn't seen him for weeks, but he was completely terrorizing my girlfriend, and I was helpless to do anything because he was invisible. He was hiding in plain sight apparently, but we never saw him. I was ready to seriously hurt this guy. The last night I saw the guy, I was staying at my girlfriend's house, and her family was out late visiting some of her more distant family that lived about an hour away. It was just us in her house when we heard a window shatter. We locked ourselves in her bedroom and called the police, who instructed her to stay in the phone with them. We had no idea who it was. All that was clear was that somebody had broken into her house. I always carry a knife almost everywhere with me, so I took that out. It was a little knife I got as a bachelor gift for my brother's wedding, but I was ready to seriously hurt somebody if they tried hurting me or my girlfriend at this point. We could hear him walking around the house. He began opening several of the doors, but never closing them. He checked the pantry, the basement door, her parents' room, and the bathroom. By the time he got to her bedroom door, we were well aware that he was close. We found out it was him when he jiggled the door handle and realized it was locked. He began saying, "Aw, what's wrong, honey? Are you scared now? I bet you wish that guy you call your boyfriend was here to protect you." He then kicked the door so hard that the bottom panel cracked. It wasn't broken, it just had a giant crack in the wood. And she screamed. It was at this point that I yell out, "I am here, you fuck. You will breathe your last breath in this room if you come in. Get the fuck out of this house and leave us alone," in as intimidating a voice as I am able to muster. I was scared too. Luckily, just as I said that, the police came and arrested the guy. The window he smashed was the sliding door on her back porch. My girlfriend was severely shaken up, and I cried a lot. I was really scared, but at the time, I had a ton of adrenaline running through me. I was really ready to kill a person that night, and that mindset is something I will forever remember. Once you're actually in a situation where you might have to defend yourself and kill somebody, you really begin to understand how much animal instinct dictates your behavior. It's terrifying to even know I was capable of thinking that way. My ex-girlfriend and I are still very close friends to this day, but we don't talk about this ever. I know her memory of this still messes with her because she sometimes sends me paranoid text messages about seeing someone looking at her. The saddest thing that she sent me was that she's afraid to go into her house because she walked in and all the doors were wide open like the guy had left them that night. She's terrified of doors being open around her house because she thinks people could be hiding in those rooms or that somebody was searching for her. We broke up for reasons unrelated to this, but I still love her as a friend, and she will always be my closest friend. The guy ended up being a recidivist who had been in prison before for breaking into a girl's house that he had also been stalking, but that was before stalking laws actually existed. So at the time, he was only charged with breaking and entering. I just recently had a baby boy, and over the past few months since his birth, I've spent a lot of time home alone during the day while my fiance is at work. A few weeks ago, we had an incident that started a rather horrifying series of events. It was early morning, around 7 a.m., and my fiance had already left for work. After spending the morning feeding and lounging with the baby in our bedroom, he fell asleep in my arms, so I moved him into his bassinet located right next to my queen-size bed. We live in a one-story home, so all of our rooms are ground floor. There are 2 large windows in our bedroom, and they are narrow but stretch from floor to ceiling and let in a lot of beautiful natural light. After laying the baby down, I went into the kitchen to do some dishes. As I left the room, I noticed that my cat was lying on the bed near the bassinet. When the baby first came, I never left the cat unsupervised with him. My cat is very small, female, and very quiet. However, I know that sometimes pets can act up when a new baby is born. Our son was now about 2 months old, and the kitty has been mostly disinterested in the baby, so I was no longer worried. I grabbed the baby monitor just to be safe, but felt pretty secure letting the cat sleep in the same room as the baby. I had been in the kitchen doing dishes for about 10 minutes when I heard the baby fussing a bit on the monitor. He whimpered a few times and I kept an ear out to see if he'd fully wake up or if he was just falling in and out of sleep. Suddenly, I heard the cat through the monitor hissing and growling loudly. It was a deep, throaty growl that I had never heard from her before. At the same time, the baby started wailing. The only time I had ever heard him cry that type of cry before was when he got his shots. It was a cry of real fear. I realized my worst fears were happening. I believed in having pets for life, and so when I found out I was pregnant, I went to great lengths to prep the kitty. I wanted to make the transition good for her. I was super worried she wouldn't transition well despite her easygoing personality, and now here we were. My cat was attacking the baby, and it was my fault for leaving them alone. At the first sound of the hissing and my baby's wailing, I dropped everything and with soap still on my hands, sprinted the 2 rooms over back to my bedroom. I walked into a scene that I didn't expect at all. The baby was kicking around in the crib, red-faced and crying, and the cat was sitting at the foot of his bassinet facing away from the baby. She was facing the window across the room, puffed up and still growling. She wasn't attacking the baby, she was positioned to defend him. I looked to the window but saw nothing. The thick drapes were still drawn with a small open space between the fabric where the 2 drapes meet in the middle. I pulled them back and saw nothing out front. The cat had now stopped hissing but was still quietly growling in a hunched up position. I picked up the baby to comfort him and pet the kitty until she calmed down. I didn't know what to think, but I was really on edge. Why had my cat freaked out? It was so out of character for her to react to random sounds or noises, and I have never seen her so afraid. I remained unsettled for a few hours, but eventually forgot about it. A few days later, this time in the evening, I sat with the baby in the living room, between my bedroom and the kitchen, reading a book. My fiancé was home and just going to bed for the evening. It was about 9 p.m. He gets up around 5 a.m. for work, and so he doesn't stay up very late. He was in our bedroom with the door closed, and I sat in the living room on the sofa. Our sofa is directly in front of a large bay window, and it's very wide and also goes floor to ceiling. The drapes were still open, and it was not quite dark outside yet. The sun was just starting to set. At some point, I sat the baby down on a mat in the middle of the living room floor and went to the kitchen to get something to eat. While preparing some rice, I started to get a prickly feeling on the neck. I felt as if someone was watching me, and for some reason, I felt really reluctant to look out the kitchen windows, which were also open. I quickly finished making my food and decided to take it into the living room to eat. I didn't want to spend any more time in the kitchen. I walked back into the living room, bowl in hand. The doorway faces the large windows, and so I was facing the giant windows as I walked in. That's when I saw her. There was a woman. She looked to be in her late 20s, early 30s, and she was staring, nose pressed up against the window, looking directly at my baby. She didn't seem to notice I had walked into the room, and she just intently stared at the baby. She looked angry, and I felt terrified. I grabbed the baby and yelled for my fiancé. The lady in the window then took off running. My fiancé came out in his boxers and was still half asleep. I told him about the woman and then about the previous day when the cat defended the baby. I became convinced that she had been watching the baby that day as well. I can't explain why I think that, but I was convinced that she wanted to kidnap him. A few weeks passed, really uneventfully. We were much more careful about locking up and keeping our windows locked and the drapes drawn at night. I was really on my guard for a few days after seeing the woman outside the window, but eventually let it go a bit. Then, our cat started acting odd again. I kept my baby boy in the room with me most of the time and always had monitors going when he wasn't in the room with me. One day after feeding him, I laid the baby down to sleep and took a quick bath one room over. I had monitors on but knew he'd sleep for about an hour, so I had some time to myself. The kitty was once again sleeping in the room with the baby as she had been doing. About 15 minutes into my bath, I heard the cat hissing through the monitor. I jumped out, grabbed a towel, and ran into the room. She was pacing in front of the large bay window with her back arched and fur on end. The baby was still asleep, and she dashed off when I went by her, like she was still really on edge and full of adrenaline. I peeked out the window and looked all down the street, but saw nothing, so I let it go and kept the baby with me the rest of the day. About a week after the incident, we had my fiance's good childhood friend come stay with us from a state over. He stayed for 4 days. He was alone in the house on day 2 while my fiance was at work and I was out with the baby. He was sleeping on the couch at around noon when he said he woke up to the sound of someone fiddling with the front door. He thought it was one of us coming home, so he fell back into sleep. He half woke up again to the same sound from the back door. He thought we might have forgotten our keys, so he got up to let us in. My fiance called him at this point to check in, and his friend said, "I'm just about to let you in, 1 sec." When my fiance said, "I'm still at work, and I just spoke with Sarah, and she's still out." His friend said that he just sort of sat down and waited to hear more noises. He heard what he thought sounded like someone walking the perimeter of the house, but he wasn't sure if he was imagining that part out of fear or not. The next day, our friend, who is also the baby's godfather, was watching the baby for an hour so I could go for a run. He said that about 10 minutes after I left, the cat started being really weird. She'd walk around the house sort of slinking around and was really flighty when he approached her. She was very used to him and often let him pet her and snuggled up to him often. It didn't make sense that she'd be afraid of him 3 days into his visit. She would periodically jump into the windowsills and hiss out the window at nothing in particular. He kept looking out to see what she was so upset about, but he saw nothing. When I got back and he told me about all of this, I had this sinking feeling that someone was prowling around our house. I was slightly afraid that whoever it was had watched me leave and knew the baby was home with someone most likely less vigilant than his mama. I felt like maybe I was overreacting, but I just felt so weird about it. This last incident happened last week. This is about a month after our friend's visit. Last week, we went grocery shopping at a local store. I was pushing the cart and baby was in his carrier in the cart. I turned to pour some almonds into a bag when a familiar looking woman approached us. I couldn't remember how I knew her, but I thought maybe I'd seen her at the store before. Anyway, she was cooing at the baby and saying how cute he was. I was polite and thanked her. She asked how old he was and I told her about 4 months. She said it was a precious age and how it was nice that I was a young mom. She said she had wanted to be a young mom, but had waited too long, and she said that it was good that I didn't wait. At this point, I was feeling weird. We'd passed the point that I felt was a comfortable amount of time to randomly talk to people in the store. Many people comment on the baby when we're out and tell me how cute he is, ask his age, etc. But usually, after a minute or 2 of polite conversation, we part ways and continue shopping. I was trying to finish up with the almonds and move on, but she was right in front of my cart. The conversation would sort of die out, and I'd turn, and then she'd start talking again. I felt like she was keeping me there. Finally, I turned to grab a tie for my bag, and she said, "It's funny, he looks so much like me. I bet I could carry him around and no one would know he wasn't mine." I got a huge chill and had a sneaking suspicion that she was familiar because she was the woman from the window. I was now panicking internally, but I didn't want to tip her off. I just sort of stood there, hovering over my baby. I laughed awkwardly and said I needed to go. She asked to hold my baby, and I realized she was staring at him, not even looking at me while she asked, and I firmly said, "No." People were starting to look because my no was very loud. I pushed past her and she kept looking at him as we walked by. I checked out and booked it home. I'm honestly not 100% sure she was the woman from the window, but her behavior made me feel like she was. I'm not sure if I'm just being overly paranoid, but I should add that my first baby died at birth, and with this baby, I have been incredibly careful and sometimes overly worried. I do have a somewhat irrational fear of him dying because of the earlier loss, and I am afraid that I am overreacting, but I also feel that this is getting out of hand. I told my fiance about the grocery store, and collectively, we decided to install a security system. We're still shopping around for that, and I don't want weapons in the house. We also tipped off the local police. They said they can do extra patrols, and I am hoping they will actually do this. My mom recently decided to tell me this story. She has refused to tell me anything before, except that she had been stalked while she was pregnant with me. Asking her to explain always made her uncomfortable, so I stopped. We were eating lunch when out of nowhere she said, "I'll tell you now," and I knew immediately what she meant. She had been living in Blue Springs, Missouri at the time, and was about 28 weeks pregnant with me. My father and her had not yet married, and he was in the Marines, so he wasn't around that much. She worked at an engineering company, and she usually stayed in the office for lunch, leaving her alone. The area the office was located in had multiple buildings and was patrolled by a single police officer. He stopped by my mom's office more times than would be considered patrolling. He came in and said hi and chatted with her for a bit while she ate lunch, and then he left, leaving a letter behind. The letter was a bit creepy, but not on the lines of, "I should tell someone." It basically said things like, "You're very hot," and "I want to date you," and just kind of like a love note. My mom blew it off and decided to ignore it as a way of saying, "I'm not interested." A couple of weeks passed and his visits got more frequent and more creepy. He started to bring her lunch and small gifts like perfume and candy. She thought it was a bit creepy, considered she was now verbally telling him she was not interested. Then, the second letter came. He walked in with 2 milkshakes. He set the vanilla one in front of her and kept the chocolate one. She set it beside her as he talked to her and didn't drink it. He then began prying her to drink it in almost a bizarre way. He gave up and left, leaving another letter behind him. My mom thought this one was very bizarre. It said things like, "I bet your baby is as hot as you," and "I want to rub your belly," and things like, "I want to fuck you before you push that baby out." This is when my mom was truly concerned. Before my mom had the chance to confront him, there was another letter on the desk. She opened it, and it was by far the most disturbing one. The things it said were not only disgusting, but insane. A few of the bizarre things it said were, "I will come into your office, lock the door behind me, and push you to the ground and rape you." And, "I will cut your baby out of your stomach and rape it." Things so graphic that my mom almost puked. The most bizarre thing in the letter was, "I will fuck you with your dead baby." It was then that my mom decided to get help. She called the cops, and he was put on a restraining order. She told them not to tell my dad, but they did. He came home as fast as he could and sat in her office for days on end with a loaded gun waiting for him. When the court meeting was scheduled, they thought she would not show up, but she did, and he pleaded guilty and was put in jail for a year. I was born shortly after that, and we moved to another area of Missouri. My mom is still shaken by these events. She hasn't heard of him since, and she is glad. It's scary to think that such a sick person could be married with children today.